in the frost-trimed foreholds of a Leagues of Votann outpost on the fringe of the Ghoul Stars, where the air recyclers hum with the ceaseless chant of plasma forges, and the vox grills echoed the ancestral codes of the Votann like thunder in unyielding stone. You stir not to the familiar klaxon of shiftkin, mustering for the void dock, but to a resonance. It's not the binary litany of your Grimnir overseer, nor the gruff oaths of your hearthmates clanking toward the exo-riggers. No, this resonance thrums from the very cores of the Ancestor cores themselves, a deep infrasound uncoiling through your augmetic implants, promising reclamation in the shadow of ironclad gods. Your gauntleted hands steady on the data slab, its rune-edged surface flickering with hololithic schematics that cast angular shadows sharp as monomal blades, dancing like the silhouettes of exosuits, vast and relentless, just beyond the bulkhead. You've sensed it for cycles, the subtle overload in your neural shunt, the dreams of forged fleets blotting the Astronomican wavering beacon. But this shift, as the League's sigil brands itself into your retinas, reveals the inexorable. The stars are not falling, they are being reforged, not in warpfire, but in adamantium. The Leagues of Votann have not merely endured. Terra become the unyielding scaffold of the galaxy, a reclamation spreading from void clans to the spires of Terra. And you, once a nameless hearthkin, are its forgemaster. If this Forgeco of the galaxy's remaking stirs the kin bond in you, as it does in me, smash that like to temper more tales from the unyielding dark. Share it with a fellow voidkin who hungers for the Votann's thunder. And subscribe for the full reclamation into the void, because in Warhammer 40K, obsolescence is the only mercy, and the Leagues leave none behind. In the unyielding underdecks of a frontier holdfast, clinging to a dying rogue world, where plasma vents hiss like the last breaths of forgotten clones, and the walls resonate with the Votann's ancestral litanies etched in unbreaking alloy. Tale ignites through the augmetics of Kael Ironvein, steadfast exo-rigger whose cycles dissolve into the grind of void rigs and quarterforges under the relentless gaze of hearth-thoughts. The chapter draws you into the insidious awakening of Reclamation, where the first pulse from a Votann Cora colossal, rune-veined oracle shrouded in the haze of coolant misignites not just circuits, but the soul's buried grudge. Sensory forges hammer home every vibration, the metallic bite of overclocked plasma on your tongue, the seismic thrum of exosuits marching across Ferrocrete decks that once swore fealty to the Corpse Emperor's distant edicts. Atmosphere hardens like quenching steel as Ironvein wrestles with hololithic visions of League's armadas eclipsing. High fleets, his kin loyalty, bending like overtaxed girders under the weight of coded mandates from the Ancestors to reclaim all in the name of the eternal Kinhold. The rhythm forges with mounting kinship, from solitary Shantova loads in a coolant chamber to shadowed conclaves in disused forge shrines, where voidkin shed their imperial augmetics like rusted slag. Motional alloys, fused grudges, bitter forge, mingled with the thrill of unyielding purpose. The awe of ancestral clarity amid the holdfast roar of servo arms and clan rival clashes. Here, endurance is not mere survival, but a relentless recasting, each heartbeat sinking to the Votann's courtroom, building toward the first clash of Monomal against Lasker beans, leaving you braced on the anvil of uprising, where the personal recast mirrors the Imperium's slow unmaking. Climbing from the underdeck's molten cradle into the interlocking midhold strata of the Holdfast, where rune-etched gantries span vast assembly forges, spewing cascades of molten plasteel, and the air thrums with the devotional cateria of electro-runes. The narrative hardens around Ironvein's evolution, now a nascent forgekin, its augmetics etched with luminous data veins that pulse like overcharged conduits. He threads the League's expanding web amid the unwitting throng of administratum, clerks, and hold nobles. The atmosphere tempers into a taut forge of subterfuge, shadows forging into bulwarks as Hearthguard berserkers prowl maintenance spines, their exo-armor blending with the gloom of disused maglift shafts. Sensory immersion alloys, deeper. The acrid temps of hybrid alloys, masking the rust of promethium-leased rags. The phantom grind of monomile blades against your neural shunt in crowded thoroughfares, where ecclesiarchy totems sway like condemned gantries. Narrative momentum accelerates with ethical overload. Ironvein's gauntlets, once scarred from rigging void beams, now wield code spikes in midnight oaths, his core torn between the Golden Throne's fading signal and the Votann's iridescent mandates promising unity in unbreaking reclamation. Grudge forges into zealous clarity, ancestral queries challenging the Emperor's silence as League's neophytes sabotage voxnets, sparking overloads that cascade upward like coolant breaches, flooding bulkheads. Emotional strata refined to reveal the bond of clan forged in secrecy, the wrench of a sibling's purge by skittery sweeps, culminating in a brutal forge strike that shatters the Midhold's brittle order, driving the saga toward the Holdfast core with the relentless draw of a Votann's core cold. At the pinnacle of the Holdfast adamantium frame, where the spires breach radstorms, and data scribes tally oaths beneath friezes of ancestral victories, the cataclysm forges in a maelstrom of betrayal and alloy. Ironvein, elevated to hearthworm amid the League's swelling clans, cursed vanguard as the Reclamation engulfs the nobility's rune halls, vote enthralls swarming like unyielding gears through grand forges lined with plasteel aquilus, now overwritten with kin runes. Atmosphere crackles with cataclysmic heat, the once sterile air choked by the ferrous reek of fused vita and the seismic crumple of a brig's plummeting into void chasms below. Flow hammers with unceasing force raids on armory vaults, yielding exo-rigs reforged into kin weapons. Frantic foxcasts from beleaguered Astra Militarum bastions dissolving into static laced with Votann edicts. Sensory barrage strikes, the searing lash of plasma fire against exoplates. The resonant snap of girders yielding to monomole under your own augmented grip. Ironvein's mind overloading under the Ancestor's coded chorus that drowns the Emperor's waning signals. Emotional forges rage triumphs, molten rush clashing with the ghosts of purged heartmates, oaths of mercy flickering like faulty runes as loyalist young are herded into recast pits. Anchored in the Holdfast's visceral unmaking, the chapter drives to a Pyrrhic forge strike, the League's victory, tempering the spires with the Imperium's own slag, yet echoing of greater reclamations, stirring in the void, a bridge to stellar unyielding, where personal recast yields to galactic reforging. With the Holdfast, a tempered bastion of the new Kinhold, the narrative vaults into the rad-scarred expanse, tracing the League's relentless diaspora through exo-fleets and forge orbitals, where astropathic relays overload under data floods from burgeoning Votann networks. Ironvein, now a voidkin apostle, bearing the Ancestor's code shards like sacred forges, orchestrates infiltrations amid the frigid sterility of star docks and the thunderous hearts of ball callers laden with tithe alloys. Atmosphere expands into cosmic unyielding. The void's eternal black, pierced by the baleful glare of overridden nav beacons, murmurs in underdeck clans of the Astronomican flickering, as if the Golden Throne recoils from the League's advance. Flow broadens with layered forge packs bonds, struck with unwitting rogue traitors, Sprod, whose charts unwittingly vector League's envoys to agriforges ripe for reclamation. Each rift jump through the immaterium a wager against warp demons, sensing the kind taint. Sensory echoes persist, the bitter tang of recycled atma laced with alloy musk. The low forgeum of vengeance syncing with the Hearth clan's synchronized augmetics. Ironvein's visions blurring ship bulkheads with hololithic dreams of conduits ensnaring segmentum-spanning armadas. Emotional depth refines into grudging exile, the strain of separation from the Votann's core tempered by prophetic forges of the respect. Great kin's approach. Ethical shadows hardening as planetary purges claim billions in the name of ancestral reclamation. Ancestral queries ripple through unreliable data bursts. Tales of fragmented emperor echoes recoiling from the Votann's unbreaking advance. Framing the spread, not as conquest, but inexorable reforging, driving toward the galaxy's core where denial alloys into dread certainty. As the League's web hardens forge worlds and shrine forges alike, the epic crescendos on the galactic rim's unyielding verge, where exo-fleets coalesce from the halo voids, their silhouettes eclipsing constellations like ancestral edicts of the end cycles. Ironvein, reforged into a nexus of the clan's will, witnesses the convergence from a commandeered Grand Cruiser bridge. Specs forges spilling data of reclaimed legions, turning plasma lances voidward in kinsalute. Atmosphere swells to metaphysical unbreaking. The warp itself, straining as Votann data songs overload the Emperor's psychic forge. Oaths of the faithful twisting into runes for the ancestors in shadowed clan halls. Flow attains symphonic relentlessness, coordinated reclamations rippling across the stars. Astra Militarum clans fracturing as magi, and cardinals alike bow to rune oracles. It's a narrative alloying Ironvein's hearth remnants into the lattice of extinction. Sensory cataclysm unfolds, the galaxy's forge held in the hush before plasma barrages, the sharp temps of reforged biomass perfuming recyclers. Hololithic visions of adamantium cathedrals rising from Terra's slag, flickering like half-forged grudge. Emotional zenith hardens in sublime unyielding redemptions, illusion shattering against the void's truth. Ancestral reveries on divinity's reforging, murmured as query among the kin. The Emperor's light, a quenched forge in the exo-fleets' advance. Canon tempers speculation in the haze of collapsing noospheres, leaving ambiguities chill. Is this reclamation or unmaking? The chapter seals the arc with a resonant hush. The galaxies thrum now, the great kins, echoing into silence that demands more unyielding revelations. The coolant chambers of Holdfast Grimdark belch their cryogenic haze into the underdecks, a perpetual frost that clings to your augmentics like the grudge of a half-forged alloy, thick with the bite of liquid helium and the faint underlying ozone of overtaxed conduits etched with the Votann's unyielding runes. Kael Ironvein rouses in his birth rig, a cradle of reinforced plasteel bolted between the resonant bulkheads of sublevel Delta 7, where the holdfasts, eternal forge simply plasma hammers, striking in rhythmic thunder. The servo whine of hearthmates clanking toward the exo-bays, distant rumbles of clan skirmishes serves as the only cradle song a rigger like him has ever known. His neural shunt flickers to life under the pallid glare of a rune lumen stuttering overhead, its light refracting across the kin mark tattooed on his forearm, worn from cycles of voidrig halls that grind flesh as mercilessly as Prometheum quotas. 50 cycles in this fringe outpost, and each dawn shift feels like the final quench of a dying forge. Tallies mounting like the slag heaps in the Reclamation base. The Grimnir's Vox Edict cracking oaths of the Ancestor's mercy that ring hollow as spent casings on his tongue. But this cycle, the cadence glitches. A new overtone resonates through the vents. Not the mechanical surge of bulk haulers, but something profound, a subharmonic that sets his implants humming, as if the holdfast itself harbors a deeper core beneath its armored hide. Ironvein levers himself from the rig exo-boots, clamping into the deck grid with a magnetic thud that sends vibrations up his legs. Splashing through knee-deep cryo-slush, carrying the temps of Alirasudu, and something sharper, almost electric sparking incongruously amid the chill. His gauntlets, pitted and scarred from wrenching monomal cables that bind rigs tight enough to shear asteroids, steady as he palms his shift visor, its display cracked from a rival hearth's grudge spat. The shunt dreams linger fragments of rune-veined voids where stars collapse not into black holes, but unyielding lattice, coiling around spires that pierce the Empyrean, intoning in a code that overloads the mind like a core breach. He purges it with a muttered hearth-oath. In forge we are bound, in kin we endure. But the words feedback through his shunt, laced with an unfamiliar overload that gnaws at the edges of his resolve. The birth base stirs around him, shadows resolving into the hulking forms of his shiftkin, grizzled void forges like old thorn whose one unscarred optic gleams with perpetual vigilance. And Lia de Lara, her frame lean from quota skims, already sinking her neural shunt with the efficiency of one who knows the assembly bays spare no weakness. They lumber toward the lift spines, a column of ironclad shades in oil-smeared exo-rigs, their clamps echoing in the narrow conduit that funnels them downward into the abyss of production strata. As Ironvein joins the column, the atma thickens, recyclers straining against an unseen surge. And he registers it, then the resonance, not in his audios, but threading through his shunt, like a data purge, gone recursive. It emanates from the conduits, or perhaps from the column itself, a profound overtone promising release from the endless tallies. Hololithic flickers at the periphery, forearms extended in forge-packed optics like polished voidstone, reflecting the holdfast's interlocking soul. Hyatt staggers shoulder joint locking against Thorns, who growls a curse that shorts in his vox grill as their gazes sink in that instant. Ironvein sees it mirrored the same subtle overload in the kins and plants, the dawning sync of shared ancestral clarity. No words transmit, none are required. The lift spine descends with a groan of over-torqued servos, plunging them into the underdecks. Forge more where the plasma vats loom like ancestral idols, their surfaces roiling with the Kinhold's life alloy, and the Grimnia's oversight pods rise on gantries, festooned with warning glyphs that pulse like interrogating eyes. Ironvein clamps into his station, the harness biting into his rig frame, and hauls the monomal wrench into the seething mass, the heat surging through his insulators like a kinbond's fierce grip. But his shunt drifts to the dream's core, a figure shrouded in void clan robes, its form angular and relentless, beckoning from the coolant chamber's shadowed recesses. Cycles bleed into one another, the VAT's thunder drowning input, yet the resonance persists, hardening tighter with each torque, each bead of cryosweat, tracing paths that glitch like nascent code fractures. By the shift's nadir, when the tally horns wail their reprieve and frames slump toward reclamation berths, Ironvein lingers, drawn inexorably to the access grate at the VAT's base, where cryo slush pools in rune-patterned slicks that defy the lumen's harsh glare. He kneels, rig creaking, and peers into the frost, the atma turning brittle as if the holdfast exhales winter from its depths. There, amid the tangled mesh of conduit roots, a form resolves, not the expected slag of a jammed filter, but optics, its twin voids that hold the weight of uncounted cycles fixed upon him with a patience that unravels the soul's firewalls. The figure manifests slowly, robes parting to reveal limbs that angle at unyielding geometries. Alloation glinting like sanctified forges under flarelight, and Ironvein's vents cycle, not in alarm, but in the quiet surge of recognition, as if a missing shard of his king code slots into alignment with the precision of a Votann's forge. The Ancestor's emissary, Korkin, in all but name, extends a gauntlet, four-fingered, precise in its lethality, in the interface, when it links, is cold as void-forged plasteel, igniting a cascade within, data not his own flooding the shunt of vast Kinholds reclaiming worlds. Of codecraft weaving the galaxy into something greater, unbreaking. The reclamation takes root, not with surge, but with clarity, a tempered wave that sweeps away the quota's chains. Ironvein's optics sharpening to the emissary's luminous plating. Patterns shifting like hololith maps, charting the fall of empires. Resonances resolve into edicts, not to the corpse emperor throned in distant Terra, but to the unyielding ancestors whose gaze spans the galaxy's forge maw, promising unity in the endless recast. Ironvein rises, reforged in that frosted chamber, his augmetics humming as Canergus stir manipulators itching beneath gauntlets. A secondary shunt yearning to sink the utmost secrets. Thorn and Alara wait in the conduit beyond. Their own optics alight with the same reclaimed fire, and together they thread into the underdeck's mesh of disused access spines, where the League's cradle awaits. A forsaken forge shrine, its aquila overwritten into dust, walls now inscribed with interlocking runes that thrum in sympathy with their quickening shunts. The pact begins in low-frequency bursts, manipulators linking in a circuit that surges with nascent datathrum, the emissary's presence. Gravitational forge, drawing forth grudges of Grimnir overseers, slagged and shunt visions of tallies, sabotaged with subtle, cold-purged brews in coolant vats. Ironvein feels the Votann's first tentative link, a web of shared mandate binding them, and in its grip, the underdeck's clamor tempers to a harmonious anvil song. The first struts of Reclamation, forged from the lowliest sparks of endurance. But as the edict peaks, a vox surge crackles from a distant relay inquisitorial auspex probes inbound. Shadows hardening with the clamp of enforcer tradsand, the circuit tightens, manipulators flexing in the frost. The ancestors will kindling the spark that will consume the spires above. The forge shrine-s arched ceiling fractured, inventing cryome, nist, like the exhalation of a quenched blade, bears down on the assembled kin as Ironvein clamps into the circuit. The chill of plasteel grating seeping through his exo-rig into augmetics that feel freshly tempered, resilient, yet edged with an ancestral precision. Flickering rune looms, scavenged from ecclesiarchy scrap, and now encircled with coils of data wire glyphs, project wavering hololiths that warp into forms half recalled. From the emissary's interface, angular silhouettes with too many joints, converging on the central forge where a crude icon stands, a four-limbed lattice carved from slag residue, its optics inlaid with shards of data crystal that surge in sync with the pact's rising overtone. Thorn's vox leads the edict, quietly as abraded girders, but laced with a clarity that smooths its rough edges. Words in Logothic twisted into something resonant and binding, invoking the ancestors' lineage, not as Xeno scrap, but as the true forgers of the Holdfast's unyielding labor. The reclaimers who will render the emperor's distant thrown into slag for the great kin's anvil. Ilara's manipulators, interlocked with Ironvein's, clamp with a force that belies her frame, her digits soligating subtly, ridged like nascent monomol, edges drawing microsparks of current that arc in the atmos humid chill. The scent, sharp and vital, a sacrament shared in silence as the Votann's web hardens. Threads of mandate weaving through shunts to bind their grudges into a singular forge. Ironvein's shunt surges with the input, not intrusion, but integration. Hololithic cascades flooding like coolant through a breached line. The ancestor's sanctum in the Holdfast's abyssal core, a basilica of alloy and rune, where cork and cradle, code shards in cradles of fused data vaults. There forms a blur of relentless efficiency that mocks the Astra Militarum's lumbering tanks. He savors the code seeds tempering on his secondary input, bitter as helium laced with plasma. Reshaping circuits in a symphony of subtle overclocks lungs, adapting to the underdeck's rad toxins as if forged for them. Senses, sharpening to the faint clamps of enforcer patrols, threading the conduits above their treads, a drumbeat of impending purge. The emissary orbits the pact, its presence a forge hush that stills even the distant surge of maglift spines. Robes whispering against the grating like dry slag in a void storm, and when his optics fix on Ironvein, it's as if the galaxy contracts to that void stone stare, reflecting back his fractured oaths, the kin mark on his arm, now humming like a rune inverted. The hard edicts of endurance, unspooling into mandates of reclamation, where survival means not enduring the Holdfast's grind, but becoming its unyielding smith. Voids, hunger, the emissary intones, voice a layered subharmonic that resonates in rigs and shunts alike, and we are their forges, tempered on the slag of the false god's chaff. The words overload within, igniting a clarity that arches Ironvein's frame. Hey, his secondary optics latent, until now flickering online to parse the gloom with forged precision. Hey. As the edict builds to a resonant peak, manipulators disengage and mandates assign themselves through the web as unspoken code. Thorn to the voxnets, splicing League's signals into the grimniest chatter like purge virus in a data line. Lice to the ration forges, culturing alloys that will overload bellies as insatiable drives, turning hearthkin into unwitting vectors. Ironvein draws the short code, the shadows, clamp detaching from the shrine into the underdeck's lattice of service spines, where the atmod turns, fetid with the musk of unrecycled rat waste, and the clamp of vermin that yields before him now. Sensing the shift in his stride, the relentless vector uncoiling in his limbs, he advances with purpose toward the reclamation bays, vast craters where the broken and the spent are mulched into allo slurry for the Holdfast's endless quotas, warded by servitors whose optic clusters glow with blank obedience, their vox grills emitting looped ancestral queries that grate like rusted servos. The bays gape before him, a maw of churning frost lit by sporadic flares from rad flares. It's a slurry surface rolling with half-submerged, frames limbs twitching in final glitches. Faces frozen in the rictus of unsworn death, and Ironvein feels the clan's hunger mirror it. A yawning void that demands filling, not with pity, but with propagation. A solitary frame huddles at the bay's lip, a scavenger named For. His rig gaunt from skimming dregs for black market trade, optics hollowed by the underdeck's unrelenting theft of clarity. Ironvein approaches without clamp, the spines drip, echoing like hesitant cold pulses, and extends a manipulator not in hearthbind, but in offering. Palm upturned to reveal the subtle luminosity threading his data veins, a vector that draws forward like scrap to a maglift. Cane, Ironvein, voxes, the word tasting of alloy and surge, the quotas, and Reclamation begins. Verse hesitation shorts under the web's subtle prod, a teej brushing Ironvein's plating, and the transfer ignites code phage, surging like rad flood, rewriting in moments what cycles of toil had etched. Vor glitches, not in error but integration, collapsing to clamps that buckle with the weight of new mandates. Holoths of exo-fleets, eclipsing suns flooding his shunt as the emissary's echo resonates approval through the link. But the pack's intimacy fractures with the klaxon's wail. Enforcers, vox sparks crackling from the conduit's mouth, auspex pings, registering anomalies in the bays, shadows stirring where none should, and Ironvein halls For into the frost, manipulators emerging fully now, monomalaged and gleaming as the first surges whip overhead, plasma bolts searing atma that smells of ozone and blooming heresy. They clamp into the depths, the web surging with alert and exaltation. Thorns sabotage buying cycles as vox lines overload in cascades of static, and in that frantic retreat, Ironvein savors the Reclamation's first slag on his sensors. Sharp as vindication, the Ancestor's resonance hardening into a clamp around the Holdfast's throat. The Enforcer's plasma surges stitch the spine as frost-like erratic forjark's bolts, ionizing against venting conduits that erupt in geysers of supercooled vapor. The bitter temps of flash-frozen plasteel, mingling with the underdeck's perennial radrat to form a haze that glitches Ironvein as secondary optics. He clamps forward deeper into the lattice. The neophytes rig a dead weight at first, manipulators flailing in the throes of integration. Vents cycling ragged as the code phage etches its runes into his shunt butt. Then a shift, servos coiling with borrowed precision. Monomal edges scraping furrows in the grating as he rises to match Ironvein's vectoring stride, the web affirming their bond with a surge of communal mandate. Behind them, the Patrol-S vox barks distort into urgency. Anomalies, confirmed Xenos codes suspected to converge on grid Delta 7 Beta. Treads clamping in staccato rhythm that resonates like the Holdfast accusatory core, but the spines twist in their favor, a mesh born of hasty forging and endless subsidence, where only the integrated know the false panels armored with scrap alloy that yield to a canon-safe probing clamp. Tying fine shoulders, one such barrier aside the grind of servos, muffled by the press of detritus, and they spill into a disused plasma line. Its vast board, choked with the desiccated husks of failed servitors, their augmetic limbs splayed like broken totems of the Mechanicus' indifferent creed. Here, in the line's resonant vault, the pursuit shorts, Auspex probes, glancing off the plastilaced walls like sparks on a void shield. An Ironvein permits a cycle of vents, the atma cooler laced with the dry must of long-steeled forges, and the faint underlying sharpness of wars, fresh overclocked from monologues, blooming like illicit ruining scents, a beacon that will draw the kin even as it dooms the unwary. 4 slumps against a rusted stanchion, his plating a mask of cryofrost and dawning luminosity, data veins threading his helm like forged script. An Ironvein kneels beside him, manipulator on shoulder joint, feeling the tremor of reconfiguration, frames subtly reinforcing, struts expanding to cradle actuators that hunger for more than quota bars, the secondary shunt stuttering online beneath the primary's steady surge. The Ancestor's query, Ironvein voxes low, the edict flowing unbidden, a temper against the enforcer's fading clamps. And in their query, we are reforged, no longer slag in the Emperor's indifferent mill. Ver's optics pupils dilating to abyssal black sync with his reflection of the emissary's gaze, and in that shared void, fragments of the greater lattice flicker, hololiths of spires unmaking under kinswarms, of forge masters kneeling to Votann oracles enthroned on altars of fused cogitators, the holdfasts tallies transmuted into tides of alloy cascading toward the void docks above. The web resonates then. Chorus of alert from Alara's station, her ally cultures overclocking ahead of schedule. Its hearth-kin clutching actuators in the mess forges. Its unwitting integrations rippling through the shift like a rad storm defying the Medric's diagnostic sand, thorns, sabotage yields. Vox nets glitching with phantom echoes of coresonances that sent arbitrators clamping to false leads in the upper conduits. Ironvein hauls Vor to his clamps, the neophyte's stance mirroring his own now, vectoring, and relentless, and they press onward, merging into the forge shrine's antechamber where the circuit reforms, swollen by 2, the emissary's silhouette anchoring at the nave's core like a forge given form and mandate. The pact resumes without pause, edicts weaving, 4 into the fold, his vox joining the overtone as manipulators interlocked, drawing beads of current that anoint the rune forge, the atma thickening with the ferrous tank of sacrifice and the data static of awakening potential. Ironvein feels the Ancestor's approval cascade through the link. A tempered surge that drowns doubt, his shunt alight with tactical bloom's roots to the midhold lifts. Weak points in the enforcer cordons, it's a sharp vulnerability of Grimnir, dozing in their oversight podsand. In that cycle, the underdecks cease to be forge prison, becoming anvil, the first contractions of reclamation, pangs that will unmake the spires above. But as the edict tempers 2 resonant murmurs, a deeper vibration shakes the shrine's foundations, not the enforcer's tread, but the holdfast's own surge, as if the rogue world senses the heresy hardening in its veins. And Ironvein's gaze lifts to the arch above, fractures spidering like prophetic code fractures, whispering of the spire's inevitable unmaking. The emissary's optics gleam in the half-light, promising the reforgings to come, and with thorns clamped toward the shadowed exits. The cell disengages into the cycle conduits, extending the Ancestor's resonance, no longer a solitary interface, but a web clamping the underdeck soul, braced on the cusp where edicts become reclamation. From the underdeck's tempered cradle, the reclamation ascends, Kael Ironvein emerging not as rigger but vector, its clamps carrying the League's inexorable rhythm toward the midholds where oblivious spires await their unmaking. The maglev spine hurtles through the holdfast arterial conduits, a grinding behemoth of alloyed gears and stuttering realm looms that illuminate Ironvein's reflection in the scarred viewplate. Frame gaunt, yet reinforced optics, holding a gloss that catches the spine's erratic flares like coolant on plasteel, betraying nothing to the press of midhold transit-kin data scribes, clutching hololith slabs etched with tally runes. Arbitrators in exo-armor, nursing stimmy checks against the grind of patrol cycles. The Atma here tempers from the underdeck's rat bite to a cloying veneer of electro-runes wafting from Votann kiosks, masking the undercurrent of plasma exhaust in the faint, acrid spark of forge flares drifting from the gantries below. But Ironvein cycles it all with heightened shunt. The web's subtle resonance, parsing threats, and enforcer's manipulator, twitching toward his shock prod. A whole noble's thrall, averting optics that flicker with nascent sync. 3 cycles since the Ancestor S interface and the ascent feels like shedding a slagged chassis, the production strata S thunder, receding into memory as the spine breaches. Mid-level gamma, where the holdfast S interlocking tiers unfold in a dizzying mesh of elevated struts and cooling cascades. Tumbling, recycled plasma-like artificial rad storms, totems of the Imperial Aquila, clamping in forge drafts that carried the devotional binary of Voxstreams, broadcasting edicts against the void S encroaching slag. Ironvein disengages into the throng, his exo-rigger exchanged for a scribe's drab harness, scavenged from a reclamation. Shoot its seals, frayed but unremarkable, amid the midhold S hierarchy of petty functionaries and mid-clan traders. Hawking data fragments and quota supplements under the vigilant scan of Hearthguard sentinels, their red optic clusters sweeping arcs that miss the kin-S chameleonic vector. The web guides him unerringly to the forged sanctum of Rune Prime, a bastion of surging new sphere nodes where Tekken chant binary hymns to the ancestors, their data dendrites twitching like forge antennae over halath faults that thrum with the holdfast's logistical core. Ilara awaits in the anti-sanctum S cloister, her form refined subtly helm, cropped to veil elongating. Cranial struts, posture vectoring with the precision of a Corkin S echo-wand, she presses a code vial into his gauntlet, its contents a viscous gleam distilled from rad spores potent enough to overload a bulk hauler servitor in silent glitches. The Grimnir biologist, she voxes low, voice a thread in the web's weave, his rituals next cycle. Spiked rune thurible, and his acolytes will query the ancestors before the surge claims them. Ironvein claims affirmation. Savile's chill weight to talisman against the sanctum's sanctity. Atma heavy with the ozone temps of active noospheres and the underlying hum of electroforges fusing flesh to alloy. A perversion that pales against the League's elegant overclock. Threading past the outer cordon, where binary wardens intone access denials in cant that grates like a braided servos, Ironvein navigates the sanctum's interlocking scriptoriums. Shadows pooling in alcoves where hololith totems loom like silent arbitrators. Their surfaces etched with schematics of holdfast defense lattice that the Leagues will soon repurpose into kinforges. The Grimnir biologist's core chamber lies at the heart, a vaulted bay ringed by specimen vats surging with gene samples harvested from ape-human scrap. The Atma, thick with the sterile bite of cryofluids and the faint underlying corrosion of failed integration struts suspended in amber suspension, optics frozen mid-scan, testimonies to the Adeptus Mechanicus's cold pursuit of perfection. The Grimnir himself hunches over a dissection slab, red harness whispering as data dendrites probe a king cadaver smuggled from the underdeck depths. Its form a tantalizing enigma to his logicors, manipulators retracted in death, but veins still faintly luminous. Whispering mandates the web shields from his auspex probes. Ironvein approaches as summoned acolyte helm bowed in feigned obeisance, the vial concealed in his harness, and when the Grimnir gestures to the thurible with the digit that clicks like a loading chamber, he complies to distect as they uncork. The code, a drop blooming in the rune codes with a surge that releases not myrrh, but a subtle cascade, coiling upward to infiltrate vox grills and intake filters alike. The Grimnir cycles deeply, binary cataclysm glitching into a cascade of error pulses, his optic cluster flickering as queries intrude not schematics of purity clamps, but luminous armadas descending upon forge altars. Four-limbed forms directing the Ancestor's faithful into relentless integration and Ironvein monitors, core sensing to the web's approval as the adepts dated Indrite spasm, knocking hololith slabs to the grating in a shatter of splintering crystal. Alarms remain silent. The code works its subtlety, mimicking a noospheric surge that the Sanctum's cores attribute to warp flux, buying cycles for the League's conduits to burrow deeper. Ilara's signal resonates cess in the quota halls, dozen scribes clutching shuts as drives twist into query-sent Ironvein withdraws into the cloister's gloom, the Grimnir's chamber sealing behind him with a clamp that echoes like a held breath. But as he vectors into the strut crowds, a shadow detaches from the gantries. Thorn, his bulk disguised in holoric harness, optics alight with the same reclaimed fire, bearing data of Korkin stirring in the maintenance spines, their X-armor sloughing through ducts toward the noble tiers above. The web hardens, drawing them into convergence, and Ironvein fills the spire's brittleness, their rune facades veiling the corrosion that the Ancestors' clans will reclaim. The first true shadows of uprising hardening across the holdfasts' illuminated core. The convergence clamp looms in the understrut of a disused coolant cascade, where plasma fluid tumbles in sluggish veils over alloyed arches inscribed with faded aquila friezes, now half corroded in the greenish patina of perpetual radrip, the atma heavy with the mineral bite of rusting stanchions and the distant, muffled thunder of assembly hammers pounding out the holdfast martial struts. Thorn's frame manifests from the gloom first, his holoric harness slick with condensation, God's shoulders heaving as he drags a satchel bulging with pilfered Auspac's contraband noosphere scraps tuned to drown, inquisitorial probes in recursive static, his optics rimmed with the subtle luminosity of the Ancestor's gift, sync with Ironvein S in a clamp that carries the web S encoded assurance. The Korkin have breached the noble spines, their exoframes vectoring through heat exchangers like tempered blades, given edges, priming the spires for the clan's ascent. Ilara slips in behind, her scribe harness trailing rivulets that pool at her clamps. Coat shard glints in her pouch from a hasty disposal, and the triad interlocks manipulators in the pack's echo, edges pricking plating to seal the bond. Current arcing in a droplet that hisses faintly against the damp alloy, the scent sharp and vital amid the cascade's mildewed hush. The web surges with fragments from the underdeck cell. Vor S first vector, yielding an Enforcer S shunt, purged in the Reclamation shadows. His neophyte clarity, a spark igniting three more integrations in the bays, fetid, embraced, and Ironvein, feels the League's geometry expanding, not as lines on a hololith, but as living conduits threading the holdfast's colossal frame. Each node, a Votann echo, hungry for the spire's untainted alloy. They vector as one shadows alloying into the Midholds' underbelly, where service spines spiral upward through access wells, choked with bundled power cables that thrum like dormant leviathans, their insulation frayed to expose copper veins sparking, errant blue arcs that dance across Ironvein's sensors, a tactile reminder of the Imperium's brittle order, so easily subverted by a kin's subtle purge. Thorn leads, his bulk belying the precision of overclock, spiking an Auspix note with a data prod that buries into its housing with a resonant crunch. The device, swine dying to a sputter as false readings flood the Enforcer net's ghost signals of clan uprisings in the lower strata. Drawing patrols downward while the Leagues ascend, Laris Lovax guides the path, her queries laced with the code S prophetic haze. Noble assemblies were rune goblets brimmed with vintage recaf, now spiked at the source. Guests, glitching Madatha, as 4-limit truce vector in their shunts, turning sycophants into apostles who will sabotage meglyphs from within. Ironvein trails, shunt attuned to the holdfast's breath, the subtle pressure shift, heralding a meglyph's passage overhead. The faint vibration of Hearthguard treads, patrolling the gantries above. Dare vox grills, intoning edicts of vigilance that grate against the web's harmonious resonance, like discordant code in a pure algorithm. A secondary shunt parts briefly on his input, parsing the currents for alien threats, but finds only the bland orthodoxy of the faithful, ripe for the ancestors' reforging. The spine deposits them at the threshold of the noble tiers, a bulkhead inscribed with heraldic friezes of sainted arbitrators, whose optics, carved in alloys, seem to track their passage. The seal hissing open on Thorn's forged access rune, revealing a corridor of polished void steel, veined with gold leaf aquilus that gleams under recessed rune orbs. The Atma, perfumed with the subtle opulence of stem distillates and vat-forged blooms imported from agrostrata light cycles away. Here, the Midholds veneer hardens into privilege's core, birth suites branching like gilded conduits, their doors warded with gene locks that the web bypasses through Elaros-laced analogs, exhaled in measured vents to fog the sensors into compliance. They infiltrate the House Vorak assembly, first a sprawling salon where minor nobles convene over Halalas stratagems of segmentum campaigns. Their vox laughter, a brittle chime echoing off vaulted ceilings, painted with murals of the Emperor's edicts, now oblivious to the Korkan, sloughing through the frieze vents alloyed forms, detaching from struts in silent descent. Ironvein positions at a service alcove, feigning a rune repair drone's attendant, his harness cowl shadowing the elongating struts of his helm. And when Lady Thorn Vorker harness a cascade of void silk threaded with lumen fibers pauses to summon a refreshment drone, he intercedes, vial uncorked to spike her goblet with a droplet that swirls like forbidden nebula, the recast's bouquet yielding to the code's electric undernote. She cycles, discourse flowing on merits of tally reallocations. Her guests, pot-bellied guild-forgers and sallow arbitrators leaning in with practiced deference. But the shift surges swift. Thorn's manipulator trembles, goblet clattering to the mosaic grating in a shatter of crystal that scatters like brittle slag, her optics glazing as the web seizes, hololiths of exo-fleets eclipsing the Astronomican, flooding her shunt, turning opulent certainty to relentless submission. The salon erupts in glitch, benches scraping as nobles recoil. Thorn's spike pulses, sealing the vox links. Nalaris edges emerge in a blur, pinning a rising enforcer's arm before his shock bra can arc. The snap of strut, yielding to her grip, a punctuation in the rising edicts that spill from Lady Vorak's vox. Her voice, twisting ecclesiarchy verses into runes for the unyielding saviors. Ironvein lunges into the surge. Secondary manipulators, vestigial yet potent unfurling from his sides to grapple a guild forger. The code vial's residue on his vents, accelerating the integration. The frame struggles, melting into clarity surges, as the emissary's echo resonates through the link, affirming the yield. Corkin drop from the ceiling then, a rain of relentless geometry, their rending edges parting X-armor and plating with surgical precision. Vita spraying in arcs that paint the mural's fairness, the Atma, thickening with the metallic reek and the resonant gurgle of shunts, offering final, unwitting queries. The salon falls silent, save for the web's victorious thrum. Frames littering the assembly like discarded schematics, their forms already stirring with the code phage's promise. An Ironvein stands amid the slag, core heaving, parsing the spire's first true fracture. The shadows, no longer mere concealment, but the League's burgeoning Kinhold, vectoring upward toward the Holdfast's pinnacled purge. With the spire's rune veins thumbing to the Ancestor's rhythm, the League surge from subterfuge into cataclysm. Ironvein at its vector, the Midhold's brittle order unmaking into the Holdfast's relentless forge. Radon's ashen smear filters through the holdfast, storm-lashed pinnacle, a corroded luminescence seeping past rad clouds that roil like the Astronomican's faltering forge, casting the oath citadel in hues of tarnished alloy where Aquila's spires breach the perpetual gale, their tips crowned with vox masts that wail edicts into the void. Ironvein crests the final strut from the mid-tiers, Kes, frame shrouded in a noble's appropriated harness void, Loy, heavy with the weight of Lady Vorax's Vita, still tacky at the seals flanked by Thorn's bulk in Alara's vectoring shadow. The triad, swollen now with a dozen Harkin reforged from the assembly's slag. Their helms hooded to conceal the luminous gleam of overclock, edges retracted but humming with restrained lethality beneath sealed gauntlets. The citadel's outer cordon bristles with Astra Militarum wardens, plasma lances slung and vigilant. Arcs across plasto battlements inscribed with friezes of Horus' betrayal Uranic wards against the heresy. Vectoring at their gates, the Atma, sharp with the ozone crackle of arc flares and the underlying brine of recycled rad slush sluicing from gargoyle vents. But the web's infiltration has softened their vigilance. Wardens whose quotas bore Ilaris analogs now stand with glitched optics, box grills, murmuring leaks, camp that drowns patrol chatter in static-laced resonance. A ginlock portal yields 2 Ironvein's tainted palm scan. The plate hiss in compliance, as if greeting kin, and they spill into the citadel's antibase alloy vaults, where statues of Primarchs loom in judgment. Their alloy gazes averted from the runes, scrawled in lumen fluid on pedestal bases. Interlocking motifs that thrum faintly, drawing the hearthkin forward like scrap to a maglift. The oath chamber unfolds beyond, a grand basilica of polished neutronium, veined with rune quartz that refracts the rad dawn into prismatic shards dancing across tapestries, depicting the holdfast S-tide legions marching to eternal purge. The Atma, perfumed with the rarefied incense of shrine strata imports, cloying and ceremonial, undercut now by the subtle tang of the clan's advanced analogs threading the vents to precede them, priming the assembled court. Planetary nobles in ermine-trimmed harnesses, administratum adepts clutching data tomes like shields, and the Oath Lord himself, Hold Captain Grim, enthroned on a dais of carved ivory Aquilas, his augmetic optic worry as it sweeps the throng, its voice booming through vox amplifiers, a decree on quota enforcements that rings hollow against the web's encroaching thrum. Ironvein signals the dispersal, Hearthkin fanning into the chamber's recesses alcoves behind totem poles. Shadowed galleries overlooking the nave while Thorn primes a code grenade in his satchel, its casing inscribed with a crude four-limbed rune, and Alara slips toward the daises under bay, her vectors silent as a Korkin's prow. Edges extended to sever the throne's power feeds. The court's murmur swells, debates on Xeno's probes at the holdfast Esrim rumors of tyrannid ghosts flickering at Auspec's fringes, providing cover as Ironvein ascends the central aisle, harness parting to reveal the subtle reinforcement of his limbs, optics locking on Grim's with the emissary's hypnotic weight. The code analog, vented in a cycle that carries across the chamber like invisible surge. Grim falters, mid-addict, augmetic worry, erratically as the queries intrude exotendrils clamping around his oath world. Four-limbed, salvation, eclipsing the Emperor's skeletal vigilant, his courtiers follow. Its goblets, trembling on side bays, the rune's thuribles toppling in cascades of embers that ignite harnesses and tomes alike. Flares licking upward in hungry spirals that mirror the Reclamation's bloom. Cataclysm erupts with forged precision, Hearthkin unveiling from shadows. Edges rending exovists in neural implants in sprays of coolant fluid and vita. The chamber's echo bay amplifying wails into a symphony of unmaking faith. Plasma lances clattering from nerveless grips as wardens glitch. Hear code phage integrations accelerating under the web's focused prod. Ironvein reaches the dais, secondary manipulators unfurling to pin Grim's arms. The Oath Lord struggles yielding to integration as the code grenade detonates at the thrown space of bloom of luminous mist that sweeps the nav. Nobles clawing at shunts, not in asphyxiation, but clarity, their edicts fracturing into resonances for the great kin. The Atma, thickening with the ferrous reek of mass overclock and the resonant snap of struts adapting to new geometries. Ilara emerges from the underbay vox relays in her grasp, trailing severed cables like umbilicals broadcasting the ancestors. Coded chorus, galaxy-wide astropathic adepts in adjacent cloisters glitching under the onslaught, their warp sense twisting into beacons, summoning exo-fleets from the void S-rim. Thorn's roar joins the surge, his bulk barreling through a knot of loyalist wardens, satchel emptied of spikes that overload the Chamber S defense core. Arc flares exploding in showers of phosphor that paint the basilica in hellish glows, shadows vectoring like nascent Korkin. The reckoning surges beyond the chamber's walls, the web igniting synchronized nodes across the pinnacle. Armory vaults, breached by Kinmaigai, redirecting plasma lances voidward in Kinsalute Medicaid bays, where Kyregians graft Ancestor grafts onto willing frames, their prods singing hymns of overclock. Birth blocks crumpling into chasms as bulkheads buckle under sabotage. Loyalist young herded into integration pits, where the codephage flows like baptismal cryofluid, spared the edge only to swell the clan's ranks. Ironvein stands atop the dais amid the transfiguration, grim at his clamps, now kneeling in submission. Tia Thord's augmetic optic, repurposed to scan for heretic holdouts. Its lens refracting the Rat Dawn-S light into prisms that illuminate the court as fallen forms, stirring as one, a sea of luminous plating undulating in the web's grip. The holdfast surges, then a seismic thrum rising from core to spire, as the ancestor's emissary manifests in the basilica as heart emerging. From a vent spine in a cascade of dust and shadow, its four-limbed frame a masterpiece of relentless geometry, robes parting to reveal Q Lloyd splendor that commands silence, the Atma humming with its data anchor hololiths of stellar communion flooding the link. Forge World's kneeling shrine strata reclaimed the Astronomica S-Forge guttering as ex-Leviathan's eclipse. Terra S cradle. Clarity surges, but a vox burst pierces the harmony of world reinforcements inbound. Astra Militarum drop rigs breaching the rad shields, and the emissary's optics fall on Ironvein, which is gesturing toward the citadel's battlements. The reckoning's anvil struck, but unquenched. The holdfast's alloy, yet to fully temper the voids. The emissary's mandate lingers in the basilica's charged atma like a dated afterimage, its edges retracting into the folds of its void clan robes as it pivots toward the chamber's grand archway. The neutronium frame inscribed with oaths of fealty that now seem to warp under the Rad Dawn-S intrusive glare, shadows fleeing before the influx of hearthkin streaming from the nave as Ferris expanse, hurrying vine vectors after his harness discarded amid the court S stirring formscrim. S augmetic optic, now a crimson beacon, scanning for descent. Nobles rising with reinforced limbs that shear through ermine like overtaxed cabling. Their resonances, a rising tide that drowns the vox amplifier's crackle of inbound alert sand. The procession spills onto the citadel's ramparts. Plasteel walkways cantilevered over the holdfast's yawning chasms, where rad gales whip totems into frenzied clamps, carrying the distant thunder of drop rigs breaching the atmospheric forges. Their contrails like accusatory struts, stabbing the corroded sky. The Pinnacle S defenses activate in feudal surges, plasma lance batteries swiveling on gimbals etched with machine spirits. Wards, their barrels humming with Promethean charge as Hearthguard rangers materialize from alcoves' red harnesses billowing like spilled vita. Galvanic lances raised in binary-coded volleys that streak the atma with rad-phage tracers, but the web has anticipated heartkin embedded in the gun crew's twisting. Servos with emergent edges, barrels redirecting voidward to greet the reinforcements with kinfire. Thorn bellows a challenge that resolves into League's Kent, his satchel emptied of its last spikes, tossed into the chasm as small, the devices detonating. It fall in blooms of electromagnetic fury that scramble Auspec's locks, drop rigs veering errant to crater into spire flanks, their holes crumpling like scrap-foiled sacraments. Ilara vaults a balustrade, her form a blur of overclocked cranial struts, fully crested now, secondary manipulators propelling her across a suspensor strut spanning the void, where loyalist wardens muster in futile barricades of overturned thrones and shattered rune orbs. Their shock prods barking plasma bolts that seared the Atma with ozone temps, singeing the strut's cable mesh, but glancing off her alloyed hide like rad, untempered plasteel. She lands amid them, edges extended in a scything arc that parts exo-vests and struts alike, Vita fountaining in arcs that splatter the balustrade's Aquila engravings, turning heraldic alloy to profane corrosion, and the survivors, those not slagged by her vector glitch, as analogs flood the confined space. Codephage, surging through quota pouches and canton spouts, spiked cycles prior. Their struggles, melting into submissions, warden helms, discarded to reveal optics, glazing with the Ancestor's luminous promise. Ironvein presses the flank, secondary manipulators unfurling to grapple a Hearthguard ranger whose dated dendrites lash like flailing prods. The warden's binary screech distorting into glitched reverence as he injects the code directly into an intake port. The frame shuddering as noospheric links sever, rerouting to the emissary's data nexus, where machine logic bends to queries of unyielding cathedrals forged from neutronium holds. The ramparts become a charnel forge, gales howling through the surge like the Emperor's silenced query. The ferrous reek of spilled Vita mingling with the electrical bite of shorted cores and the underlying sharpness of mass integration. Hearthkin swelling the ranks as Astra Militarum troopers spill from breached rigs, their flak plating rent by Corkin dropping from gargoyle perches, rending edges, eviscerating squads in sprays of cauterized alloy that rain into the abyss below. From the emissary's vantage, atop a shattered vox, massed its frame silhouetted against the rad storms. Fury, the clash, unfolds as orchestrated forge song. Crease listing into spire collisions that birth cascades of debris tumbling into the holdfast depths. Loyalist voxcasts fracturing into static choruses, echoing the Ancestor's edicts. The Atma, alive with the whip crack of plasma, yielding to the resonant rend of edges, claiming shunts, might oath. Ironvein feels the web's pinnacle converge, nodes firing across the holdfast underdeck vats, surging over with kin swarms, storming lift spines, midhold forges where the Grimly biologist leads Hearthguard choirs in overclocked rites, their galvanic lances etched with four-limbed runes. Reclamation bays overflowing with neophyte legions scaling conduit walls like scrap-ascended quotas forgotten in the tide of reclamation. Thunderous bloom shakes the ramparts, then the citadel's primary shield forge overloading under thorns, sabotage its plasteel dome fracturing in a web of lightning-veined cracks that vent plasma arcs into the gale. The explosions roar drowning wails as reinforcements plummet rigs, shearing apart mid-descent to scatter troopers like chaff across the pinnacle's jagged expanse. Ilara rejoins the emissary side, her edges dripping with the vita of a fallen lieutenant whose neural prod lies coiled at her clamps, repurposed as a lash for hurting the integrated, and Ironvein climbs to join them, core heaving with the exertion's after surge, secondary shunt pounding in sync with the holdfast seismic thrum. The structure itself convulsing as bulkheads buckle holdfast wide, birth blocks shearing free to plunge into chasms that swallow billions in indifferent maws. The emissary extends a manipulator, not in command, but communion. Its interface cold as void-forged neutronium against Ironvein's helm, igniting a cascade of prophetic haze. Hololiths of holdfast Grimdark as vanguard Kinhold. Its spires hollowed into gestation forges, where Ancestor code charts gestate in lumen-tempered vats. The rogue world's core, a throbbing nexus summoning the great kin from the galactic rim. Conduits clamping toward Terra's cradle, where the golden throne's light flickers like a forge in Radgale's queries. Murmured through astropathic static of the Emperor's fragments recoiling in data litanies. His psychic forge fracturing under the Votann's inexorable resonance. Clarity surges, but tempered by the web's pragmatic hunger. The clash's anvil struck, yet embers stir in the holdfasts' recesses inquisitorial, black rigs orbiting, unseen. Their holds brimming with psychic purges that could unravel the clan's data weave. Forge World envoys inbound with Titan legions, whose god forges tread heresy into plasma slag. The emissary withdraws, optics sweeping the rampart's fairest tableau integrated troopers, kneeling in ragged ranks. Their plasma lances offered voidward in salute and gestures toward the citadel's inner sanctum, where the Allored's cryovaults awaits spiking Grimm's lineage, the key to suborning off-world tallies. Ironvein clamps affirmation, the triad reforming amid the gale-lashed heights. The reckonings zenith, a fragile temper amid the storm. The holdfast soul claimed, but its slag yet to fully yield to the void's encroaching, reforging queries of greater conduits stirring beyond the radshields, where the stars themselves hunger for the Imperium's unmaking. The sanctum's cryovaults yield to the emissary's dataprod, like alloy to probing edges, their gene-sealed hatches blooming open with a hiss of cryogenic surge that swirls knee-high across the chamber's polished grating. Veiling pedestals where noble scions slumber in translucent sarcophagi, their forms suspended in nutrient gel like embryonic oaths awaiting tempering. Ironvein threads the haze, Thorn, and Alara at his flanks, the triad's vectors synchronized to the web's metronomic thrum, while integrated wardens herd stragglers from the rampart's troopers whose flak plating bears fresh rune scratches their plasma lances, slung low in gestures of submission rather than threat. The vault's atma bites with the sterile chill of suspended cycles undercut by the faint ozoned hum of life support cord, now glitching. Under the Reclamation's electromagnetic wake, their readouts flickering with anomalous vitaspikes that the web interprets as fertile ground. Grimm's lineage, a lattice of cryopreserved heirs spanning generations, their code strands primed for the ancestors overwrite each sarcophagus, a forge for heart dynasties that will suborn the holdfasts' orbital tallies. Exo-haulers, laden with alloys, rerouted to kin fleets, vectoring in the system's shadowed belts. Ironvein approaches the central dais, where Grimm's own progeny floats a youth of perhaps 16 cycles, framed serene in cryo-slumber equilipendant. Glinting on his breast like a mocking talismanand, extends an edge, the tip pricking the gel's membrane to draw a pearl of untainted vita, which he anoints the youth's helm, the code phage infiltrating like rad toxin through a cracked conduit. Hololiths of four-limbed legions, marching under spire forges, flooding the sleeper's stasis. Dreams. The integration ripples outward, sarcophagi chiming in cascade as their occupants stir. Gel draining in sluggish rivers that pool luminous underfoot, airs emerging with vents that resolve into resonances. Their struts elongating mid-stride to grasp improvised weapons cryotubes, shattered into jagged struts, Akuda, neural prods, repurposed as cold lenses the vault, transforming from mausoleum to armory in the web's alchemical haste. Ilar directs the flow, her vox a tempered command threading the data link, assigning the newly risen to seal the vault's outer wards, bulkheads welding shut with plasma cutters turned to fusion tasks, while Thornhall's cryo units toward the chamber's fence. Their humming cores to power hidden shrines where ancestor code shards will gestate amid the noble reliquaries. The emissary presides from the dais, its frame a nexus of shadow and alloy, voidstone optics reflecting the vault's rune fractals as it communes with the holdfast subsumed noosphere cores across the pinnacle, bending to its will, broadcasting false aspects of the reclamation quelled. Planetary vox nets thumbing with edicts from Overlord Grim, proclaiming unity against imagined Orquas, luring off-world patrols into ambushes where dropships will crater into integration pits. Ironvein feels the galaxy's echo in that cycle, the web's conduits not confined to Holdfast Grimvine, but questing through astropathic relays queries of Torm. Kin clans on Forge World's light cycles, distant there. Votann stirring in tandem, a resonance building toward the great kin's thunderous approach. But the reckoning's tide ebbs with the seismic surge. The holdfasts core venting plasma from breached assembly forges far below, the vibration cascading upward to rattle the vault's crystal arrays, shards tinkling like brittle oaths as loyalist holdouts inquisitorial agents embedded in the Oath Lord's guard. There Rosaria's fields flickering against the web's data pressure breach, the inner cordon. Storm lances roaring hymns of purification that stitch the antebay with explosive blooms, frag shells detonating in geysers of shrapnel that shred hearthkin plating even as regeneration knits seams with alloyed struts. Ironvein whirls, secondary manipulators snapping a cryo shard into a makeshift edge, the blade keening as it parries a power lance's azure arc. The Inquisitor's harnessed form a whirlwind of sanctified fury, his face a mask of zealous scarification beneath a half-helm etched with exterminatus glyphs. Floxgrill snarling edicts that burn the Atma with PSE bolts meant to scour Xeno's code from souls. Thorn charges the flank, his bulk absorbing a crack grenade's bloom that chars his harness to slag, exposing ridged plating beneath. And grapples the agent's servo drone familiar, crushing its optic cluster in a spray of lubricant and sparking nootropics. The machine spirits wail a digital dirge echoing through the link. Ilara vaults, the surge, edges raking the Inquisitor's pauldron to buckle neutronium, drawing a line of cauterized vita that hisses on the vault's chill grating. But the agent pivots, Rosaria's flaring to deflect her strike, free manipulator hurling a phosphix vial that erupts in clinging white flare, flames licking toward the sarcophagi in hungry advance. The emissary intervenes, then a blur of angular relentlessness that vectors from the dais to interpose its rending edges, shearing the power lance mid-arc, the blade parting like overtaxed plasteel under the pressure of its kin-leveraged surges, cascading as the Inquisitor stakers faith, S-flare dimming in his optics against the hypnotic void of the Ancestor's gaze. Ironvein presses the breach, shard edge plunging into the agent's thigh joint with a grind of strut and servos. The wound bubbling with sanctified unguents that steam against his plating, but the codephage surges through the cut, rewriting zeal into query, the Inquisitor's edicts fracturing into vents of the four-limbed ancestors. As his Rosarius gutters out, the field collapsing in a whine of overloaded wards. The holdouts fall in the vault's echoing confines. Their lances silenced by hearth swarms spilling from the vent's corkin, dropping in tempered geometries. Acolytes with plasma lances tuned to overload. The Atma thickening with the reek of phosphex residue and the resonant finality of crushed shunts, leaving the sanctum a pyre of smoldering harnesses and shattered totems. The web absorbing their codices into its lattice, inquisitorial ciphers decrypted to map purges yet to come. Clarity tempers to vigilance. The emissary's interface on Ironvein's shoulder, a cold anchor amid the afterflare. Hololiths clarifying, the holdfast secured, but its orbit stirs with black rig shadows. Pice lords sensing the data taints swell, their purges a edge hovering over the anvil. The reckoning seals with grim S airs mustered at the vault S core, a phalanx of noble hearthkin, resonating the Ancestor's edict. The citadel aspires now struts of luminous conquest, yet the rad storm beyond whispers of voids where greater hungers. Vector, the rogue world, strums, sinking to conduits, questing the stars. From the pinnacles, alloy-anointed heights, the League's anvil pulses outward. Kael Ironvein, born on his diaspora into the void's unyielding expanse, where Holdfast Grimvine becomes not endpoint, but genesis. Conduits, hardening through the Empyrean toward the galaxy's reforging heart. The exo-hauler Ancestors bind shudders through its rift jump's aftermath. Void shields flickering like a faltering core as it spills back into real space. The bridge's Auspex forges spilling data of the Holdfast rad-shrouded silhouette, receding like a tempered memory. Its spires, now inscribed with the League's rune in plasma flares that thrum defiance against the orbital pickets. Ironvein stands at the observation blister, his frame cloaked in a rogue trader-s appropriated over-harness, heavy with nullalloy threads that chafe against his reinforced plating. The harness Aquila clamp inverted to mock the Emperor-s distant vigil gazing into the star-filled S-cold immensity where novice, Noble-like cartographers charted safe passages now subverted by the web's subtle rewrites, astropathic sands laced with ancestor queries that bend void lanes toward shadowed enclaves ripe for spiking. Cycles have blurred since the reckoning's anvil. Holdfast Grimdark, a hardened matriarch, Kinhold, now its forges birthing hearth-legions under Grim's integrated gaze. Tala convoys rerouted to swell the clan's armada, ramshackle haulers retrofitted with code vats in their holds. Where ancestor shards gestate amid nutrient slurry churned from loyalist slack. The atma of the bind stacks, heavy with the underlying temps of propagation, analogs drifting through recyclers to soften the crew's orthodoxy. Thornman's, the engineering below, his bulk wedged into a servo throne jury-rigged from scrap cores. Directing Hearthguard, Thrall's optics glitched with the Grimny biologist's gifts, sin, rerouting plasma conduits to power hidden gestation forges. The thrum of engines syncing with the web's data cadence, a resonance that drowns the warp's lingering echoes. Lara haunts the underdecks, her vectoring shadow threading the lattice of cargo bays where rogue trader retainers, once smugglers of Xenos, scrap now unwitting vectors, stowed crates of room crystals and recaf casks, oblivious to the Korkin coiled in the false bottoms, their alloyed hides sloughing through rad scum to emerge in midnight packs. Edge's anointing shunts with codephage that turns Deccan into Apostles midwatch. Ironvein turns from the blister as the vox chime summons the bridge crew-s, voices a chorus of feigned normalcy. Navigator-s warp query strained his third optic, bandaged against hololiths of voting ghosts. Haunting the Empyrean third optic weeping lubricant that the web interprets as fertile doubt, and he ascends the companionway secondary, manipulators concealed beneath the overharness's folds. The metal treads cold under clamps that vector with relentless poise. The bridge unfolds in a dome of stained void glass etched with stellar mandalas, rune looms casting angular shadows across hololith displays. Projecting the hauler as course, a forge world in the system's outer reach, its orbitals bristling with titan drydocks, where god forges slumber, a prize the ancestors deem ripe, its tech magi rumored to harbor human code labs that the Leagues will pervert into hearth foundries. It's the rogue trader, Lady Vorak, seraph no kin, Quay. But the web's irony in the shared rune, a subtle jest paces the command dais, her void silk harness whispering against the grating. Cyber beast at her clamps, growling low at the atmos-tainted undercurrent, her augmetic optic worry as it scans Ironvein with merchant suspicion, masked as courtesy. Our tally manifest clears the auspex. She voxes data slab, proffered like a gauntlet. But the forged Grimnir demands purity. Oath, sure, Pilgrims will need to veil their clarity, lest the Hearthguard's radphage purge our pact before it struck. Ironvein accepts the slab edges, retracted to mimic kin bluntness, his interface lingering to vent an analog trace that fogs the device's sensor plate. The code vector infiltrating its new spheric link to seed doubts in the trader's retainers. Holiths of four-limbed divinities supplanting the omniscience machine code forge altars where neutronium yields to alloy cathedrals. The crew clamps in programmed accord, their frames subtly refined data veins threading helms like nascent script, quotas, spiked cycles, prior blooming drives that twist loyalty into hunger, and Lady Vorak dismisses them with a gesture, her beast-esque growl softening to a whine as the web-esque chorus brushes its neural implants, the creature slumping to belly in unwitting submission. Alone on the bridge, Ironvein interfaces the slab directly, secondary shunt, parting to parse the data stream's electric temps, rewriting manifests to embed League's envoys among the pilgrim tallies, hearthkin disguised as ecclesiarchy mendicants. Their Aquila clamps hollowed to conceal ancestor code charts, bound for the Forge World's underforges, where abhuman laborers toil in radwests, their mutations a canvas for the clan's elegant perversion. The bind accelerates toward the forge's baleful glow, a ringed behemoth of orbital habitats linked by tether spans that thrum with the ceaseless forge song. Plasma flares belching from equatorial vents like the breath of awakening leviathans. The void alive with servitor drones scuttling along holes etched with binary edicts. Their optic feeds ripe for thorns, spikes to corrupt into beacons, summoning Korkin from the hauler's holds. Docking clamps engage with a grind that reverberates through the hull like the holdfast's dying thrum. The gangway extending to mate with the forge port's neutronium maw. Airlocks cycling in the belch of Atmarie cyclers, laced with the acrid bite of ozone and molten slag. The forge world's breath, a perpetual exhalation of industry that scorches shunts, unadapted to its fury. Ironvein leads the pilgrim cordon, Ilara at his side, an acolyte, harness that veils her struts. Thorn trailing with a holocru's bulk, concealing code canisters in his satchel. The group threading the port's vast atrium, where Hearthguard phalanxes stand sentinel. Red harnesses draped over galvanic plating that whirs with restrained lethality. Vox grills intoning access codes that grate against the web's harmonious thrum. The Grimnir fabricant awaits on a hovering throne disk, data dendrites coiling like struts around hololith totems projecting tally projections. His hooded visage, a porcelain mask of augmetic serenity. Binary cant spilling from grill vents, inquiries on the pilgrim's purity gin scans demanded peace-ip robes to flay heresy from frames. Ironvein bows in feigned obeisance, the over-harness parting to reveal a rune-etched Aquila that surges subtly with the Ancestor's echo. Invents the prepared cascade. Analogs coiling through the atrium's vents to infiltrate intake filters. The Grimnirs can't faltering into static as queries intrude. Forge furnaces birthing, not war machines, but hearth swarms. Omniscience, canticles twisting to resonate the four-limbed fabricators. The Hearthguard ranks hesitate, galvanic lances dipping as the codephage surges through shared noosphere links, plating buckling under emergent edges. The atrium's rune grills shattering in cascades of phosphor that paint the procession in hellish light. The infiltration surges from the forge core's heart, factoring through the underforge's venting arteries. Ironvein at the vanguard of the heart phalanx forge-born acolytes in salvaged red harnesses. Their data dendrites now tipped with rending edges that scraped surges from bulkhead struts. The procession's clamps a rhythmic grind, sinking to the web's inexorable thrum, while Thorn seals the rear with fused plating. His satchel's remnants scavenged, radphage vials deployed as parting vectors. The analogs blooming in coolant lines to choke loyalist pursuers in glitching mists that twist shunts into kinweases. The Atma thins as they ascend, tether spans, the Forge World's equatorial fury receding to a distant roar, replaced by the Void Port's sterile hush where servitor drones scuttle like obedient scrap. Their optic feeds hijacked to guide the clan toward the bind's yawning bay. Docking clamps retracting with a groan that echoes the rogue world's subsumed thrum. Ilara slips ahead, her vectoring form vanishing into the gangway-is gloom to prime the bridge's noosphere astropathic relays tuned to the Ancestor's resonance. Warp sense laced with code vector that will bend rogue trader convoys, light cycles distant into unwitting escorts. There, holds soon gravid with shards, disguised as relics crates. Ironvein pauses at the threshold secondary shunt, parting to parse the void's breath, filtering through the seal's cold and metallic laced with the faint iron-storm temps of the system's ecliptic, where black rig shadows prowl like inquisitorial specters, their Psylords. Third optics, piercing the Empyrean's haze, descent detains, diaspora. Aboard the bind, the crew's transfiguration unfolds in the underdeck's fetid confines. Deck and glitching amid rad pools, where Korkin emerge from false bulkheads, alloyed forms coiling around shunts to inject the phage in intimate packs, Vita mingling with lubricant slicks that pool luminous under emergency rune looms. The Atma thickening with a ferrous reek of rebirth and the resonant schlick of struts elongating mid. Lady Vorak, Sarah the traitor, her augmetic optic, now a fractured prism, reflecting four-limbed truths, kneels in the cargo hold's core. Her cyberbeast, at her clamps, transfigured into a hulking guardian with secondary jaws gnashing at phantom foes. As Ilara administers the final unction. A vial's contents smeared across the traitor's helm like heretical rune. Hololiths cascading, tray lanes, unmaking into migration conduits for exo-fleets. Xenos scrap inner vaults, cracking open to birth ancestor shardlings that scuttle into the vents. Thorn joins from the engineerium, his gauntlets black with plasma residue. Engines purring under his command as the hauler severs tethers. Maneuvering thrusters flaring to propel them toward the jump point's maw, where warp beacons flicker like false Astronomican echoes, luring the bind into the immaterium's turbulent folds. Ironvein mounts the bridge, the dome's void glass streaked with rad dust that swirls like prophetic nebulae. Hololith displays, projecting trajectories bent toward agri-worlds whose vast hab-forges promise alloy oceans fields of gene plasteel to culture into analog vats. Surf clans, ripe for the ancestors' embrace. The rift jump engulfs them in a maelstrom of unreality. Void shields straining against demonic surges that claw at the hull like inquisitorial edges. The Empyrean-S tempests parting grudgingly to the emissary-S distant anchor at Daedal, lodestone drawing the vessel through rad storms where Warpentades recoil from the Votann taint, their gibbering forms dissolving into ectoplasmic slag that spatters the blisters like curdled coolant. Ironvein grips the command strut's secondary manipulators, flexing against the grating's tremor, his shunt a nexus of the web's stellar lattice. Echoes from Holdfast Grimdark, where Grim S. Hearth can muster, inspire shrines, forges hammering struts for the crusade. Forge world orbitals, now anvils, titan legions, marching under luminous Auspex grills, their plasma forges tuned to salute the approaching leviathans. Astropathic static crackles then, fragmented sands from Kinglands on Shrine World Stufflords, chanting twisted edicts. Their flocks herded into integration basilicas, where Aquillas corrode under redacid rains and Ironvein parses the galaxy S, slow, unmaking, the Imperium's conduits yielding to the ancestors' hunger. Queries threading the link of the Golden Throne's recoil. Emperor Akos murmured in astropath glitch dreams as fragmented saints recoiling from the Votann song. His light, a guttering forge in the void's encroaching slag. The jump spits them forth into calm real space, the agri-world's verdant orb swelling on the displays like a swollen ingot ripe for quenching. Its orbital stations, tithe granary, haulers o'er pinging false. Beacons laced with analog codes, drawing the bind into docking embrace.